Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have about 30 of the 42 people who indicated an interest in this workshop already signed up. And in the interest of respecting everyone's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Tracey Martin, and I'm the grants coordinator here at the food bank. And just a few sort of housekeeping notes for technology. You all are muted during this presentation. If you have questions, you can pop them into the chat box. My trusty sidekick, Kayla, is here to monitor those chat box activity, and she will let me know if there are questions. You will not see my face today because I'm running the presentation and I decided to let the PowerPoint fill up the whole screen. And also, you were sent the handouts yesterday by email, but they are available through this platform now. And if you, for some reason, can't access them or don't have them, let us know. And we can also send them to you after the fact, so don't feel like you have to be taking minutes like a crazy person. And afterwards, I will also send some additional links to follow-up information because it's a lot to try to fit into a time-limited presentation. So without further ado, I guess we'll get started. Oh, I have to do this. Okay, so there's the only picture you'll see of me today. Tracey Martin. So I've been with the food bank for a very long time, lots of different positions, which has helped me, A, never get bored, and B, gain exposure to lots of different parts of how the food bank runs, which is helpful to me as a grant writer. I've been grant writing for 16 years at the food bank, and then just last November had my job change, much to my delight, from one that had 500 extra responsibilities, and then write some grants in your spare time, to one that I only now have 300 extra responsibilities. Anyway, my job now is strictly focused on grants, and that's given me a lot more time to focus on them, because if you've written any grants, you know that it takes quite a bit of concentration and uninterrupted time, which, in the human services field does not really exist. And I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm just sharing with you what I've learned over the years. I'm still learning, always learning. I try to take advantage of webinars and blog posts and listserv articles just so I can keep learning, and I encourage you to do the same. So today we're going to cover grant writing from a very high level view. I'm not going to, give you specific answers to questions. I'll go over what some of the common grant questions are. But really, we just want to learn how to try to increase our chances of getting funding from grant funders in a calm, measured, targeted way without driving ourselves crazy, because we don't want to get into the pinch point there of that deadline sneaking up on us. And, in your jobs, you're always having to put out fires, and that deadline isn't going to change. So you really need to kind of plan as much as you can. So I'm going to just talk about for a minute, sort of in the broad way, how I view grant writing. And I really look at it as a combination of art and science. The art part is making your case personal with the funder, trying to put a face to the people that you serve. So it's not just the food bank moved 50 million pounds of food. Well, who cares? What did you do with it? Who needed it? Why did you do it? Try to make there be some connection there to a real person. And the other part of the art is having relationships with those funders and maintaining those relationships, calling them if you can ahead of time to discuss your project, or just make sure your idea is consistent with what they're looking to fund. And then afterwards, not only going to them when there's an ask. You don't want to view your funder as an ATM. You want to say thank you if you get funded. You want to say thank you if you don't get funded. And then throughout the year, you want to send them newsletters, or if you see an article in the paper that's relevant to your cause, maybe forward that to them just so they remember you, but not always with your hand out. And then for the science part, we'll go over this, but do your homework and be prepared. Don't go to a funder with no knowledge of their funding priorities. Try to get as much information ahead of time as you can, and then do your due diligence inside in your own organization, and we'll talk some more about that. And then common sense and experience. If they're asking you, what is your agency's mission? Answer what your agency's mission is. Don't go on about why you need this funding. That's not what they're asking. answer what they're asking, because reviewers, just like you and me, are very busy, and you don't know if they're looking at your application at the end of a long day, and maybe you're the 10th application in a stack of 20, and like they just don't waste their time. Increase your chances of getting a yes by just using common sense. Answer the questions that they're asking, and move on to the next one. And then, this is, like I said, it's an ongoing learning experience. It's not like anybody is ever an expert. So here's a little bit about what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about basic info about grants, where to find grants. That's what a lot of people always want to know. What is the process once you find a funder and you want to apply? And what are the different pieces to include? And then some tips and resources. So I know this is like common sense. Talk about common sense. What is a grant? It's money that doesn't have to be repaid. That's not a loan, but it's not like free money. You have to apply for it. You have to ask and say to them, this is a need we recognize in our community. We feel like we're a good fit to try to help meet that need. We're going to use your funding to do A, B, and C. And then when you get the funding, guess what? You have to do A, B, and C. And at the end, you have to report on it. So yes, grants are like money that you didn't have to have a fundraiser for, something, or a direct mail campaign, but it's not like it's without consequence. Sometimes grants are unrestricted. Those are everybody's favorite because you can use them for what you determine is your highest need. Sometimes they are restricted. We're giving you money to buy a van. Then you have to use the money to buy the van. And like I said, most funders have reporting requirements. Now, back in the day, people would say to grant writers, oh, just ask Bill Gates for money. He's loaded. Like, hello, it doesn't work like that. It's not just like, oh, and by the way, I don't have him on speed dial. It's not like I know him, so you have to go through the process, but grants are a form of money with usually some strings attached. And then these are the different types of grants, and I highlighted the first three: general operating, unrestricted. That's what we love. You can put that towards staff or lights or fuel or rent or whatever. A little harder to get. Most funders like to give you money to support programs. So for instance, here we have a senior delivery program. Then if we get that funding, we have to earmark it for the senior delivery program. But funders really like program support. And then capital equipment projects, or capital projects if you're getting a new building, or you need a forklift or a truck or an addition to your space. Those are another type of grant, and obviously those are restricted. And then there's research grants for people in the medical or sometimes educational fields. And then the other kinds of grants that are a little less common are, in kind. You could get a grant, let's say Google ad grants. You can get money, sort of, not real money, but they'll give you an award to like promote your cause on Google, seed money to start new projects, and then capacity building. I'll be looking for some capacity building grants shortly, because my director yesterday said to me, we really haven't had any leadership training for our C-suite people. Can you try to find some of that for me? So to me, that's a capacity building grant, because it's going to help us do better internally. So anyway, we're going to mostly focus on general and program support in this presentation. So you've been at your agencies for a while. There's all kinds of different money coming in, and I don't have to read the different lists to you here, but I just wanted to put this slide up to remember foundation grants, which is what we'll focus on as opposed to government grants. So like I said, I've done this for a long time, but I'm no expert. I have not done federal grants. That's like my white whale. I hope to get to it sometime. And now that I am, my position has changed where it's more focused on grants, I hope to have time to. But so foundation grants is what we're talking about today. But I put this up because I need to remember from time to time. So I thought it might help you that grants we secure are only part, hopefully, of our organization's revenue stream. So for instance, we had a grant meeting here last week, and I asked all the directors to give me their list of stuff they anticipate needing in the next 6 months. And the chief operating officer gave me a list with like 6 things on it that each cost $200,000. I was a little bit sweating it out, saying, gee whiz, that's kind of a lot. And how much of this is on me to try to secure? And it turns out, it's part of it, but not all of it. So just remember, grants are an important part of what we try to get in for our agencies, but they're not the only part. And the other reason that's good is because grant writing is a little bit of a risk. You put applications out there, you do your best to research a funder to see that it's a good fit. You try to put together the best application you can, and you still might not get the money. So it's no guarantee. And sometimes you might have to remind people at your agency that there's no magic bullet. So that was an overview about grants, where to find grants. Now look at, and I've learned over the years to work closely with my finance office and my development team. Who has funded us in the past? And have we maintained a good relationship with them to the point that we could go back and ask for another grant? Hey, that's sort of low-hanging fruit. They liked us enough last year. Let's see if they still like us enough to fund us again. That's the easy stuff. And then, look for connections with people you already know who might have connections to the funders you want to know. So for instance, I'm a grant coordinator. I'm not a bigwig at the food bank. I'm not out at chamber events and fancy dinners and knowing who the heavy hitters are. But other people on staff are. Our CEO definitely is. Our board members might know some of those people. So tap into that expertise if you can, because you already have a connection to obviously your coworkers and your board, or through your CEO, you can reach your board. If you belong to a professional organization, like I'm part of the Grants Professional Association, or chambers, make a good use, have your organization make good use of your chamber membership and have people come back to you with ideas about companies that might be pursued. And especially if you're in some sort of group that focuses on your subject matter, the cause that you work so hard for every day, just ask people. You never know who might have an opportunity for you to apply. So those are the people you can reach out to. And then publications are another way to find out what agency that does similar work to you is funded. And who funds them. That was not good English, but you know what I mean. So look at their newsletters or their annual reports where funders are listed. And sometimes they're even listed in an annual report by their giving level. So 5,000 to 9,999, and then they'll list a bunch of donors. Some of them are foundations. Then hey, that might be an appropriate range we could ask for because they funded this cause that's very much like our own. Read the newspaper online or hard copy, just see what's happening. For instance, in Saratoga, there's been a lot of coverage of Business for Good. Ed Mitzen and his wife, they own a bakery, they donate all the proceeds to charity, and they've gotten very large. And hey, how can we make a connection to them? Who knows them? Are we at an event where they are? Can we get our foot in the door? Just try to be aware of what's happening in the community around you. Programs of cultural institutions, like if you go to a show at Proctor's, which is a theater here in Schenectady, they list their funders, and some of them are foundations. Just be sort of like a sleuth and go out there and see what you can find out about other agencies and how they are getting supported. And online listservs, I'll send you some links to a couple of those. And once you're on one, you can sort of gain access to others because there'll be links and you can sort of get yourself connected to a bunch of stuff to learn what's happening out there. And if you're looking on company websites, so let's say there's a company that Pepsi, let's just say. I don't know, I haven't applied to them recently, but you can look on their website. Generally, grant information is under social responsibility or community tabs. And then you can find out about their philanthropic giving and their priorities. Also looking at Foundations 990s, and I'll give you some tips on that later on, but foundations generally have to file 990s with the IRS, and those appear on GuideStar, which is also now called Candid. Again, I'll give you a link to that later. But you can look up their 990s, which tells you a whole bunch of information, including who they funded in the year they're reporting for and how much. Grants Action News is another way to be notified about upcoming funding opportunities, and there's a link later in the presentation about that. People often ask me about grant search software. Foundation Search, Foundation Directory Online, those are a couple of them. Grant Station is another one. The first two listed, Foundation Search and Foundation Directory. Foundation Directory might have a free level or a very minimal cost level, but the bells and whistles model, which is the most useful, and the same with Foundation Search, they're very expensive, like $8,000 for 3 or 5 years. It's a lot. So you really have to have time to use that software to make it worth the investment. But larger libraries, like here in the Albany Capital District area, the New York State Library has that software free. It's just not as convenient because you have to go there and reserve time to use it, but it is one of the options for searching for grants. Grant Station is a software that is often available on sale for like $75 through TechSoup. If you join the Grant Professionals Association, it's free with membership there. And I'll just put a plug in for GPA because I'm a longstanding member and a founder of the local chapter. The dues is, I think, $225 a year. And then if you want to join the local chapter, it's $25. But the benefit to GPA is you have access to free webinars if you're a member. And if you're not a member, then there's a nominal fee. But you also get free access to Grant Station, and they put on a huge annual conference, which this year has a virtual component, so you don't even have to travel to, this year it's in Seattle, though I would love to go to Seattle. So it's just, and you can network with peers. And there's a weekly sort of email, I don't know what you call it, but people ask questions and then other people answer them. And so it's a good way to network and be connected to other people. I'm a member of GPA, but I get nothing out of it if anyone joins. I'm just letting you know why I like it. So then when you find a funder that you think is of interest, what is it you're going to look for? You want to look to the agencies that they have funded in the past. What amounts do they tend to fund? That's the reason the food bank does subscribe to Foundation Search. And one thing I really like about it is they give you by category. So human services, education, healthcare, the highest grant, the lowest grant, and the average size grant, which is very helpful for determining how much you should request. And the locations, like the geography. I guess I put that on the next line too, the geography. So for instance, the food bank has a farm out by Thatcher Park in Albany, for those who don't know. And we had a staff member at the time who was always bringing me in funding opportunities for the farm. Oh, this is a great fit. You should apply. Well, if you did a little digging, it was a perfect fit for what we were looking for and what we do, except they will only fund in Oregon. Well, that's not a good fit for us. Do your homework, because you don't want to waste your own time or the funder's time and kind of look like you didn't do your research, because why is an Albany, New York application coming to a funder that will only look at Oregon? And then you want to look at their priorities, sort of their culture and their personality. Some of them might be, very religious focused, and maybe that's a taboo for your agency or exactly what your agency is looking for. You just want to see what you can get of the flavor of how they operate. Sometimes, obviously they have websites too, a lot of them, except some of the smaller foundations, so you can learn there what their social, what do they call it? CSR, corporate social responsibility, what they're looking to give back in their community and the issues that are important to them. If you have access to look up their 990s, you can spot their giving trends over time. So are they generally showing more money invested in nonprofits over time or less? Often that's based on their own, how's their bottom line? Are they having a better year or a worse year? But you can see if it's If you've been funded in the past and they are giving out more this year, maybe you can bump up your ask a little bit. And then, you know, sort of the kiss of death, do they accept applications? Because some of them don't. And some of them will give only to pre-selected charities. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but generally, if you're not one of those pre-selected charities, move on. It's hard to become one unless you have an in. Someone, well, I'll talk about that in a second. But you know, that almost might be the first thing you ask is, do they accept applications? That is a plus of the Grant Station software. They only list funders that accept applications. Foundation search lists all of them. And I didn't want to talk about where to find grants without talking about community foundations. Community foundations, I'm just going to read this because this is the best definition I could find. They pool donations into a coordinated investment and grant-making program dedicated to the social improvement of a given place. So a community foundation, for instance, in this area of the Capital District, is the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region. They solicit donations from individuals who want to support the community in various ways. They get all this money in, and then they distribute it in grants to make life better in a given place, so the counties that they serve. They also manage donor advised funds, which we'll talk about in a second. So I gave you the link on this screen, which I would encourage you to look at because it's a link to the community foundations throughout New York State and the counties that they serve, because we're all from different areas. And I've given a few here. So the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region, I think, has maybe 7 or 9 counties. The Schenectady Foundation, on the other hand, is only Schenectady County. If you're in the North Country, you would be interested in the Adirondack Foundation because they serve basically the Adirondacks, people within the Blue Line. And then toward the Lower Hudson Valley, just as an example, there's the Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley. There's also a Community Foundation of Orange. I can't remember the other name, but look for that. If you're in that area, use that website to find the one that's closest to you. I work very closely with our community foundations in our 23 counties. Like, they're easy to talk to. So if you have one in your area, call them up and ask for the person who works on, you know, distributing the grants. It is a fabulous contact to have. For instance, locally, Shelley Connolly works for the Greater Capital Region one. And I can call her and say, you know, we have this project and I see you have this grant opportunity open. Do you think they'd be open to this? Or is it like one of the things we've really seen skyrocket is the price of boxes, right? RFB boxes are now $1.32 each. We order thousands of RFB boxes for repacking our food. Well, I don't know if a box is going to be sexy, quote unquote, to a funder, but I can ask her, you know, and she'll say, well, you know, maybe if you pitch it as you're supporting the retail store donation program and not necessarily the box, you know, they'll give you honest feedback and also say what you know, what is an appropriate ask. So I'm sorry if I'm scattered and all over, but it's like, what is that called when you free-form thought? We have a new CEO, as you probably know. So in the past, I always applied to this one funder through the Community Foundation for a $5,000 grant. They love the program that I applied for, but I'd always contact Shelley and say, you know, are they still in love with it, or should I try to move it to something else? No, they still love it. But I would always apply for the 5 and I would always get the 5. So I thought that's the amount. So my new CEO knows the people who run the foundation, and their daughter's her neighbor or something. You see what I mean about connections? You just never know. And my CEO said, ask for 30. And I'm like, what? That's like 6 times as much. So the verdict is still out because the application was just due. And I did contact Shelley and say, I'm going for this bold move, but we'll see. But having that connection and someone you can be honest with, you know, is so helpful. And then if something goes wrong when you get a grant and you have a contact like Shelley, you can say, you know what, for instance, it didn't happen with Shelley, but we ordered 2 trucks. We need 2 new trucks, and they were supposed to be here like in March or April. But because of COVID and the national shortage of everything, they're still delayed. So if a funder gave us money for a truck, I have to stay in touch with them and say, look, this is what we're facing. We really would love to still keep your money so that when it comes in, we can pay for it. But I would understand if you need us to shift it or, God forbid, return it. And they never want it back so far. As long as you're upfront and say what your issue is, they're generally very understanding. So that's why another reason to have that connection is so helpful. And then the same is true of the United Way. I must say, since COVID, I mean, United Ways always were pretty visible and did a lot of community support, but since COVID especially, they have really stepped up and invested in communities like I've never seen before. So I would not overlook them as a potential funding source. You can start with their website and maybe talk to the people that work there. The only warning I would give you is that United Way's applications can be very involved with a very strong emphasis on outcomes. That's a challenge for me at the food bank because I don't have access to low-income people directly, right? So it's not enough. I mean, years ago, it used to be enough to say, we're going to provide 6 million pounds of food through this program, and we think we're going to serve 3,000 people, whatever. Well, that's not good enough anymore. That's called an output. That's what you did. They want to know about outcomes. What changed? And yeah, you can say, well, a person was hungry and we gave them food, so we sort of assume that was a good thing for them. Too vague. They want to know, how did it increase their food security? Are they in a better place? Is there maybe their cholesterol or blood pressure better? And it's like, I have no clue. I provide food to pantries. Like, I don't know. So it's very challenging for me to try to make that connection. So you have access to low-income people, but you're very busy. You're not like, you don't have time, and you're probably not equipped to like take someone's blood pressure before and after. There's a lot, and plus, even if you could, there's a lot that impacts a person's blood pressure or A1C or whatever. So just be aware, you got to really give yourself time for these applications. So when you have researched your funder and you want to start thinking about writing your grant, you want to ask yourself, what is it that you hope to accomplish? So we want to reach people in underserved communities. Okay, that's a good idea. Instead of just, we want to pump out more food. We want to reach people in new communities. Okay, well, what resources do you need to do that? Well, we need food, and we need a truck, or we need a van, and we need volunteers and boxes and whatever. Try to get your mind around, what is it you want to do? What do you need to make that happen? What funding might be available in the community, and what funders has your agency already approached? This is where it's important to work closely with your development and finance staff if you're an agency large enough to have those. I know not everybody has that. But you don't want to go to Key Bank and ask for something. If the development department just went to Key Bank and asked for something, you kind of look like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So be strategic and be smart and do your homework in-house ahead of time. And then look at your deadlines and your own time and build a calendar. Now, there's lots of software and programs that people will try to sell you, which you might want. I don't know. I just use an Excel spreadsheet, and I put all my deadlines in it for applications and reports. And then once a month, I transfer them onto the real calendar that I use in my day-to-day life. So I keep tabs on myself. Because I don't want to be a crazy person. I'm not someone who works well under pressure. I need a lot of lead time. And I've also learned, don't have to hit me in the head more than 10 times, to build in a buffer. So because things happen, and especially in your work, you're trying to do something, but then someone desperately needs food, that's a higher priority in the moment than this grant that's due in 3 days. So I've learned to build in a buffer to keep my own sanity. Some people thrive under pressure. You have to learn what your own best work approach is. So you build your calendar and your list of prospects, and then you apply. That sounds so easy, doesn't it? Oh, yeah, we have a question.
Somebody said, how important is it to detail the proposed/expected outcomes in applications?
And did everyone hear you, Kayla?
I'm not sure. I think
okay. So the question is, how important is it to detail your proposed outcomes in an application? Did I get that right?
Or your expected outcomes.
Your expected outcomes. Extremely important. We'll touch on that in a little bit, but there's usually a section. Most funders provide you sort of a template of what they want you to talk about, and there's generally a section on outcomes. And it is kind of a hard thing, but that's where, like, if you have the time, but try, read about evidence-based and research-based outcome measurements and just how you might sort of incorporate what you read there into your programs. And that's another important thing too, which I'm sorry if I'm getting off topic, but you as a grant writer are thinking of very specific things. So I get it. I know I have to measure A, B, and C, but if I don't work with the program staff who's actually going to implement that program and make sure they can measure A, B, and C and will measure A, B, and C so we can report on A, B, and C, it's going to be a disaster. So work closely with, again, I don't know the makeup of the agencies on this call. Some of you might be the chief cook and bottle washer, and you are the program person and the grant writer, and then just have a little conversation with yourself. But other times, you have to meet with the people who are going to be doing the work, because you're submitting it, but generally other people are implementing it, and you're relying on them to do it and report on it, because it's your agency's good name at risk, but also yours with the funder. So we'll talk about that a little more. So the trick question here is, what do you need the money for? Well, the food bank needs a truck. Wrong answer. No, the food bank needs to reduce food insecurity, or we need support for our food rescue programs, or we need to help feed hungry children. It isn't about what the food bank needs, even though that's counterintuitive, right? It's about what the community you serve needs, what the people you serve need, and what the funder is interested in, and sort of how then you're just a conduit. You're like a tool to help bring that change to bear. So I know that took me a long time to get my head around, but I remember I was at a workshop and the leader kept saying, no, you don't need a truck. And I was like, but we really do. Like, that's what I got to get. And finally it dawned on me, oh no, the truck is just a tool for reaching this higher goal. So that's why I said over here, what do you hope to accomplish, right? You want to make it, like Sue here often says, you want to move that needle on food insecurity. You want to help make life better for people who are struggling with chronic hunger. How soon do you need the money? This I often come up against with colleagues here, because they'll say to me, oh, like we have this offsite cooler, and there is technology we can get so that if the temperature offsite goes below the safe level, people here will get texts on their phones. Well, that's pretty important, because you got to maintain the integrity of the food, and you got to make sure that cooler is running appropriately in that temp, even though it's 5 miles away. And they're like, well, just get me a grant for that. And I'm like, you know what? We need to get that, and I'll look for funding, but it's not like I'm going to find it and then get it for you tomorrow. We need to find another way to fund that, because that's a critical need that can't wait 6 to 9 months for a typical grant process, or 9 to 12 months. And then also look at how much time do you have to write the grant. If you're under the gun with 100 things and something is due tomorrow, or let's say Monday, and you just found out about it today, hello, it's Friday, I'd like to have a weekend, maybe I'm not going to be able to get this one in. And is grant work the best way to get the money for what you need? So for instance, maybe a certain funder is a better approach for a major gift by our CEO or our development director, because there's access to more money, or there's just that personal relationship that's stronger and a more likely outcome of them saying yes than if I, stranger to them, submit this online application in a sea of 50 other applications. So just try to figure that out before you spend time on something that is not necessarily intuitive. Now, I do have a separate handout. How do I get there, Kayla? One moment while we have some technical assistance. Okay, so there is a handout in your packet called the evaluation matrix, the grant application evaluation matrix. I don't use this a lot now, but I did when I was very new, and I did recently with our CEO, because you know what? Give yourself some grace. You're very busy. You're wearing 100 different hats and trying to juggle so many things and help so many people. And sometimes it's okay to say no to submitting an application. And so you look at these different things that are on the sheet. I won't go over it in, minute detail, but it's just trying to assess your agency's fit with the funder's mission. Do you have the staff available to work on this project if you get funded? Because you don't want to put all this effort in and then get the money and go, uh-oh, now what do we do? And I'm looking there on the bottom one, amount of agency resources required. That includes your own time. So if you just really don't have time to prepare something and submit something that's competitive and quality and something you'd be proud to have your name on, I say it's okay to say no. And here's a perfect example. Funding opportunity had been out there for a while, for maybe like 6 weeks, but for whatever reason, we weren't alerted to it until maybe 5 days before it was due. And it was for something new that we were thinking of doing, but it wasn't like a standard grant that I had written before that I could kind of cut and paste and then tailor, tweak it just to make it fit. It would have required significant work from someone like what do we call it? Subject matter expert, the person who would oversee it, who happened to be on vacation and wouldn't be coming back until the day it was due when I was on vacation. And I was very confident saying to our CEO, this is a good fit for us, but not this time around. And I had to push a little to say that, like she said, that's a critical flaw. We should have other subject matter experts who can fill in and not have vacation interrupt with, and I just said, well, I'll contact the funder and I will let them know that we're very interested in future rounds. Could they please add me to the list to be notified directly next time so we have the full 6 weeks to work on it? And so, so as you get experienced and more time under your belt, if you're new to this, you'll feel more comfortable being able to say what's realistic, because you don't want to just go after something. If you're going to submit something that's a thrown together disaster, just so you say you did, what's the point? So that's why I use that handout, which you can look at your leisure. One moment while we transition back. There we go. Okay, and so really I say give yourself grace. And if it's not the time, most foundations do have recurring funding opportunities, and you can try the next time with a little more preparation time. So this, I wasn't sure if I should keep this in or not, but the relationship piece is so important. If you have the opportunity to connect with someone at a foundation, and that's usually possible with local foundations versus, let's say, a Pepsi that's national and maybe has 10 people managing grants. If you have a chance to connect with someone, take the time to do that. Have a phone call or send an email, just to make that initial relationship, sort of get that relationship started, like I said with Shelley Connolly, so that the next time you have to talk to her, it's like, oh, she knows who you are. If you're not sure your project is a fit, you can ask them. Now, you should do your research ahead of time and find out what that funder is interested in, but maybe you have a little tweak like me with the boxes. Like, it supports the program they love, but I don't know if they want this specific thing. You can have that, you can ask those questions. Now, face-to-face meetings, in my opinion, happen a little less frequently, obviously, especially because of COVID, but also just because of the ease of use of Zoom and emails. They're so much more convenient for people. Although our CEO is out and about quite a bit and does meet with funders, and then she might come back and say, oh, I met with so-and-so, and this is an opportunity that you might want to consider. I really haven't done too much with sending a concept paper or other materials, but it is considered, sort of a common best practice. So if they're not willing to meet with you, maybe you can still send them stuff. People are so busy, I don't know if they will read it. But if you're able to make that connection and there is someone local, try to figure out who is the best person. So for instance, Shelley Conley is the grants person at the Community Foundation. So it's appropriate for me because I'm the grants person here. And it might be appropriate, but I don't think it would be for me to contact their CEO because I'm not at his level, but our CEO and their CEO, sort of are the same and could talk the same language. And so figure out who is the best person to make the call, because if it's most of the time they want to talk to a leader or someone who is really the expert in that program. So just put thought into that and know as much ahead of time before your call or your meeting. Try to have your little elevator pitch ready so you're not wasting their time. And you basically just want to say, look, I know you're interested in funding education or hunger relief or children's programs. And so we have this program that looks like a perfect fit. And I just want to go over that with you. Do you have a few minutes? And then that shows them that you've already looked at what they are interested in and you've already determined you have a program you think might appeal to them. So they're more willing to just help answer your questions. You've got to make sure you match what they're interested in doing, because again, it's not about you, it's about helping that funder make some change in the community through their investment in your organization. So in my experience, our CEO or a board member will make the initial connection and then let me know and I'll apply. Sometimes I identify funders on my own because I do have that grant search software, and then I can just sort of apply directly, or you look at through their 990 or the software, their lists of trustees if they're local, and maybe then you say, hey, to the CEO, can you ask the board if they know any of these people and can they maybe get a foot in the door for us? Try to use those connections that you already have. And like I said, most visits are on hold because of COVID, which I think people have learned to like the value of Zoom for things like that, or even just an email, because do you really have to get in the car and drive somewhere? You're not giving them a tour, you're presenting a concept. Okay, sorry. And then common sense and manners count. And I wasn't sure I should put this in there, but I would like to say, start early because it does take time and things always happen. The common sense is follow the application guidelines. If they say, I want 12-point font, Times New Roman, 1-inch margins, don't try to squeeze in 11 font, because guess what? They're often inundated with applications and they're looking for easy ways to move you to the trash pile, or should I say recycle pile. And anything that they can do to make their own life easier, they will do. Work with program staff in your agency for content. So that's been a learning curve for me, because years ago, I've been here, like I said, 33 years, we were very small. I sort of knew everything, right? I knew if we needed motion sensor lights in the warehouse and we needed a grant for that, I knew why that was important because I worked in the warehouse or whatever. But now we have very much more specialized programs that I do not know, and I am not the best person to submit content for those specific programs, and especially for reporting on those programs, whereas the people who run those programs are the ones that I rely on. So I also work closely with the finance department, because one year, so we have this retail store donation program. Some of you might know if you pick up directly from stores, and you're called an RPA, Retail Partner Agency. But basically we go to grocery stores, we pick up their unsold stuff and bring it back here and sort it and whatnot. And one year our director just said, well, apply for retail store. So I did, and we got more grants than we had expenses for, because duh, I never took the time to talk to finance to say, where do we need the money? So that was not smart. Like I said, always learning. Also, because some people's salaries might be paid for by other sources. So for instance, we have a nutritionist on staff. Her salary is paid by a state grant. So I don't need to apply for funding for her. You just sort of have to know those things, but how are you supposed to? That's not your job. So talk to your finance office and your program people. When you get a grant, say thank you, and always report on time. Grant stewardship is a huge part of the relationship that will help you stay in the funder's pipeline, and that's what you want. So you put all that thought together and you apply, and like, what if you get the grant? Yay, yay, happy dance. Send a thank you right away. That's critical. How rude is it if you give someone a gift and they don't acknowledge it? You're not likely to give them a gift the next time their birthday rolls around or whatever. Sometimes funders will tell you how they want to be recognized. If they don't, I generally ask. Now, sometimes funders will say in the application, please let us know how you will promote this grant. Should it be awarded? So you're pretty clear, okay, we're going to put it on Facebook, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes funders don't indicate that. And then I ask them, because sometimes they don't want their name out there, because guess what? They're going to get inundated with requests from people who do what I told you to do. Look at annual reports of other agencies and whatnot. So just ask them to be polite. And now you get the money, you got to meet with your staff to say, okay, now we got this grant. Susie Q, who you said you wanted to do A, B, and C, let's map out a plan for doing it, and let's get the report dates on the calendar, and let's make sure everybody's on the same page about how this funding is going to be used. And again, common sense, report on time every time, and stay in touch with funders so that you're not only reaching out to them when you want something. And that's easy to do with technology today. There's so many articles out there about, like right now, the rising price of food. That's going to be a hardship for all of us, but especially for people on limited budgets. You might send a link by email to that article to funders who have given you money to help in the cause of hunger relief. Just saying, hey, you know, this is reinforcement why your support of our work is so important, because people we serve are going to be having a harder time, you know, keeping food on their tables. Thank you so much, something like that. And like I said too, if your project doesn't seem to be meeting its benchmarks, you want to have a conversation with that funder so that they're in the loop and they understand that you're aware. But what if you, going back to this screen, what if you don't get the grant, right? Sometimes no really is no, because you didn't do your homework, or because often what you'll be told if you ask for feedback, we received more applications than we had funding to allocate. And that could all be true. And sometimes, you know, I was on a webinar and it was fascinating to me. You could have the perfect application that met all their criteria, but it was a national organization, and one of the ones that was equally strong was in Seattle, and the other in your application that was equally strong was like in the next town over, and they were like, we can't have two from the same area. This is a national organization. So they bumped one. It wasn't indicative of a bad application or a mismatch or anything. It was just their geography. So sometimes you know, like, what can you do? Sometimes no is no. I always send a thank you anyway. Thank you for the opportunity to have applied. Thank you for taking the time to consider our application. I ask for feedback if they're willing to give it. Is there anything you can tell us that would help us submit a stronger application next time, or that would make our program more appealing and better? We want to learn and we value your input. You know, it's a little bit of schmoozy, but it's part of that relationship, and also because you really do want to know. And then incorporate what they tell you if it seems reasonable to you. And then next time around, you can resubmit if you think that's still a good fit. We talked about this, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but if something says no unsolicited proposals or gives only to pre-selected charities, I generally move on, because unless you have an in, for instance, I'm on a board of an agency in Washington County. One of my fellow board members is friends with the head guy of a foundation. And so we've got an in. So now we're in that pipeline. And that was an easy way to get ourselves considered versus, you know, starting from scratch and sending them newsletters and stuff when they've already told you they don't want them. All right. So what are you going to include in your grant? This is where you can do a lot of homework up front, and I call it a toolkit. It's all the stuff you're going to need at some point to submit a grant. So obviously you need your 501c3 letter of determination. I'm going to skip the second line that says new. and your mission statement, you know, just look at what's on there. All of that stuff you're going to want to have handy. So I have computer files, you know, I have like a materials file, and I just keep all of that stuff in there, and I update it when we close out a year and we get new poundage, or and we add a new program. I'll add that so that when it's time to write a grant, I don't have to start from scratch. I have sort of the building blocks already at my disposal. So the financials, the 990, all that stuff they're going to want. Now, more and more funders are looking at your DEI commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's not just, do you have a policy, or tell us what your policy is. It's deeper, because it should be, right? We want to be more reflective of the communities we serve in our staff and in our board, because we don't want to just be us telling a community what you need when maybe that community doesn't need that. You know, you want to be more inclusive. So more and more I'm seeing questions. I'm working on an application right now. What percentage of your staff is considered diverse? What percentage of your board? What is your organization's commitment to diversity? Do not just paste your diversity statement here. I mean, they really want you to not just think about it, but do it. It's the right thing to do, but it's a sort of a, whoa, haven't seen that question before. And now it's more and more common. This is more of the meat of an application, where you're going to really take some time. But again, if you have these sort of already prepared, and I know if you haven't written grants, or you haven't written a lot of them, you're like, well, I don't have any of these. You can start working on them. Try to figure out what you might need going forward, so that when it is grant time, you have sort of a head start with all of your materials ahead of time. And we'll talk about those quick. And then sometimes they'll ask you for attachments like org charts, and I do see biographies of key staff quite a bit, so I try to maintain those. Like, we just got a whole new level of management here, the chiefs. I had to create sort of that, or if I didn't, I'd have to do it when the grant that was asking for it was due. Online banking info, I get that from finance, because more and more agencies or funders are giving you direct deposits. So they'll ask you for these attachments, and only send the attachments that they ask for. Don't go giving them a whole bunch of extra stuff, because they don't want it. If you're sending in a hard copy of an application, which is less common these days, you will send a cover letter. But again, more and more applications are online, so there's none of that. I'm gonna skip for a second. Oh, never mind. So we'll go over each of these. These are the different parts of a grant. So if you do write a cover letter, you know, it's just sort of, dear so-and-so, enclosed is our material for consideration of funding by the such and such foundation. And then you talk a little bit about why you are the best person or agency to carry out that funder's mission, and how much you're asking for. Make it addressed to a real person, not dear friend, dear trustee. Do your homework, find out who's going to be reviewing it, and make sure it's really signed in ink by a real person. Unless you're scanning it and emailing it, then you might be able to get away with a scanned signature for the CEO, but I usually have them sign it in blue ink, so it really shows that this is the real deal. Sometimes a funder will include a cover page, and I'm going to show you that sample here. So this is an example. If they do, obviously you have to fill it out, and fill it out completely. So a lot of them, instead of a cover letter, they'll give you this and then tell you what you have to submit to them in addition. And again, I'm not saying you'll have to know the order of these things. They'll tell you in their online application. Either will just go sequentially in the order they want you to fill stuff out, or they'll write it all out ahead of time, and then you'll know. But the statement of need is really important, because you want to let them know what the issue is that you're working on, right? And why, and that it matches what they're working on. And again, the need is about the people you serve, not the need your organization has. Tracy, get it through your thick head. It's not about the truck. It's about using the truck to reduce food insecurity in the community, ABC. Document the data if you have it, and that's some of the follow-up information I'll send you is some links to where you can get some statistics if you don't already have access to that. Make it clear that your organization can address the need. You have a solid plan, because funders don't want to give to something that doesn't feel like a good investment to them. So there's this need, and we're going to help fill it. And then they usually will have you give this narrative, and again, they'll give it to you, so follow the order, especially if it's not online and you're submitting it a hard copy or an emailed copy. Make it easy for people to read, use headings and bold for the title or whatever, so it's easy on the eyes, because again, you don't know how many applications these people are reviewing. What is your project? What is it you hope to do? What will change? What are you going to do to bring about the change? And then how are you going to measure that change? How will you know if it worked? And that's kind of a hard one. And then how are you going to sustain the project? Another hard one. And I will send you afterwards a nice piece on sustainability, because sustainability isn't always just about money. Evaluation is a hard one. How will you measure performance? Unless you have really, like the JSY classes, the Just Say Yes to Fruits and Vegetables classes. Early on, they would give people a pre-test, then they would do their class, and then they would do a post-test to measure, did this make a difference? Do they know more about whatever my topic was, sugar sweetened beverages or whatever? Sometimes you have to really think this through with your program staff. How are we going to know that it made a difference, besides assuming that, gee, someone was hungry and then they ate, and that's a good thing. Sometimes anecdotal information can be very powerful. So you might not have hard stats, but for instance, during COVID, the height of COVID, when we were doing drive-through pantries like crazy, which we still do them, but not to the extent. I mean, people would give us notes out their car windows that were thanking us. And boy, oh boy, they were so compelling. They would bring a tear to your eye. A funder would love to see that. This made a difference to a real human being, even if it's hard to say on a larger scale that people who attended this drive-through event are more food secure, because you didn't have a way to really measure it. But boy, oh boy, that tugs at the heartstrings. So try to figure out a way that you can measure before and after, so you can say that what you did made a difference and you used the grant funder's money to bring that about. And when you talk about the budget, there's two parts to every budget: income and expenses. Include them both. That's one of the chief beefs of the community foundation budgets. If you have lots of different funding sources, that shows you're a strong, well-funded organization, not going to totally rely on the grant funder, which is awesome. I always say, be realistic and truthful with your money numbers. Go to your finance people. They should make sense for the program you're requesting. So if your program serves 20 people, but your budget is $600,000, well, that seems a little wonky. A funder's going to say, what? Something doesn't make sense there. And that's another tip I would give you, sort of skipping a beat for a second. If you ever get the chance to be a grant reviewer, I highly recommend it, because you will see agencies and their mistakes and their strengths, and you can learn from them for your own. So you could say, oh, if you were a funder and someone asked for $600,000 to feed 20 people, what would you say? I think I can find a better use for $600,000, or you better be feeding a lot more than 20 people. But either way, you didn't connect the dots, and I'm not sure you're going to be a good fit for us to give you this money. And really don't make stuff up, because the local funders all know each other. They talk to each other. And sometimes they want you to indicate if you have the funding, if it's committed, if it's pending. I include the funder I'm replying to as a pending funding source. And I'm not going to go over this, but these are just different categories of budget expenses. And then oftentimes, again, work with your finance office. And then usually you have to give a narrative to explain things. And so I put on the bottom of this slide, show factors in the narrative. So if you say, 35% of this employee's time is going to be spent on this project, so 35% of their salary equals this, that's the staff cost. Show how you derived it. So if you do have something crazy like $600,000 for 20 people, at least you can sort of catch up and make some of that ground back if in your narrative you make sense. Don't make things up. You really will have to report stuff. Some agencies, build a cushion into all their budgets, an extra 5%. I don't do that because we have to report on it, and we're going to get audited. You know, it's just, what it is what it is. And I try to be thorough, so I'm not shorting us, but I try to be honest at the same time. And then they want to know how you're going to fund the program beyond the grant period. And like I said, I'll give you a piece afterwards, because sustaining your program is not always about funding it in the future, although that's part of it. It's how are you going to maintain these outcomes? So maybe you will get, you have a relationship with a local social work college and you're going to have interns run this, or you will, it's a program that includes some fees. So as your program grows, your fee-based revenue will increase, and you believe that you can continue these outcomes, you know, especially if you're applying for like equipment, you're just going to include the maintenance and operation into your annual operating budget. So I'll send you that stuff, some good answers and some bad answers. The worst answer is we're going to write more grants. And guess what? We're going to knock on your door next year. Funders don't want to hear that. They want to know they're one of many. They don't want to fund a sinking ship or be the only one you're relying on. How would that make you feel? Like, kid who's living home with mom, guess what? You got to get a job. I can't fund you for your whole life. Hope that made sense. And then only include the attachments that the funder asks for. So we're doing okay with time. Tips and resources is sort of the easy part and the common sense part. If they tell you what they want in terms of page limits or margin sizes or font sizes, follow them. If you fill out applications online, you will not have a choice. Most of them will impose character limits. Character limits include spaces. So, you know, that forces you to be concise. It's called writing tight. You want to really try to get your point across in a compelling way, but with as few words as possible, and not fancy words like to try to sound smart. Just say what you do. If they ask for documentation, make sure you send that in. I mean, that's common sense stuff. Try to have someone proofread it. Again, that's not always possible with time, because if you're under the gun, you just got to get it in. But spell check on a Word document is not always foolproof, because the word could be spelled correctly but be the wrong word for your context. So especially if you have someone who's not familiar with your program. So for instance, avoid jargon and acronyms. You know, in our world, there's lots. Oh, sorry. HIPNAP, DSS, OTDA. There's all these words that we might know, but is a funder going to know what that is? So be on the lookout for that. Don't use things that they're not going to understand what they are. Focus on the human connection and make the issue, you know, present it to the funder in a way that it's a terrible problem and it's really a devastating problem for the people who are experiencing it, but we are committed to working on it. And we think if you invest in us, we'll be able to help really maybe not eliminate the problem, but solve it for a lot of the people. You want to make it sort of a tearjerker with a happy ending. You know, you're going to be able to be that agent of change. Yeah, and prove your project is a good investment, because that's what a funder is doing, right? They're investing funds to try to make the community better. And they want to give their money to an organization that's well established, well regarded, not gonna take the money and run. You know, you want to give your money to someone that's going to be a good steward of it. So if you do all those things and you have a track record of integrity and you report on time and you're transparent and, you know, you admit when you make a mistake, whatever, they will respect you and be more willing to put their funds in your pocket. And again, allow plenty of time. Not always possible, I know. I think I made a mistake the other day because I was under the gun. And what did I do? I talked about our senior delivery program, which happens to take place at dozens of sites, right? Like over 40. But this funder would only fund this specific area. And I talked about the specific area, but I neglected to mention the 40. So my budget probably looks wonky to them because I presented the program budget for all 40. And it was only afterwards, and I was like, oh, and it's too late because I've tried to reach out to try to get that one like purged so I could resubmit an edited version, and I'd never even hear back. So, you know, that's because I hurried, because I had too many things due at one time and I didn't build in a buffer. So the best intentions, you know, still maybe build in an extra buffer to your buffer. I don't know. Customize the application, meaning even if you have all that stuff prepared in your toolkit, or you have an application that's similar that you just filled out that sort of seems similar to the one you're filling out, do not just sort of cut and paste everything, you know, customize it a little bit, make it clear that you read that funder's application and you're not just kind of taking the cheesy way out. And I've talked about all this before. Don't exaggerate, you know, try to be truthful and honest, because you really want to do the right thing with the money and you have to report on it later. And like our finance office says, our auditor pulls a random number of our grant files every year, goes through the application, the grant agreement, is there a thank you letter? What are the deliverables? Did we deliver? Did we report on time? How did we spend the money? That's a pleasure to have someone audit if your files are in good order, but you don't want to be like crapping your pants because you're not, you know, ready. Sorry if I'm rude. And then my other warning is, just checking on myself, don't chase money. And I've had to talk to our new CEO a few times about this, and sometimes I win and sometimes I lose. But just because a funding opportunity comes across your desk, or I call it like, oh, shiny, there's something shiny, let's grab it. Don't do that unless you have a program in mind that fits it, because you don't want to just say, oh, there's money available, let's develop a program. That is a nightmare, because guess what? Your program staff will kill you. They already have enough to do. And once you develop a program, you have to sustain it in the future. And so don't just go after what's shiny. Make sure it's a fit, because you don't, it's a mess and you just don't have time for that. And neither does the funder to read your stuff. Now, these are helpful resources. Maren Bass is my absolute favorite trainer. She runs an organization called Grants Magic University. I tried to get her for this presentation, but she wasn't taking any more commitments for the rest of this calendar year. She is amazing. And she has some fee-based workshops, but a lot of free ones and a lot of really, really useful resources. So I turn to her a lot and her website a lot. GrantStation, we did talk about different ways to access that. It is a subscription service, but they have a lot of free webinars and free grant notices. So you can go to that website and sign up for like their newsletter, and it comes out and will give you different notice. I think I get it weekly, and it tells you regional, national, local funding opportunities are out there. Funding for Good is another website I like a lot that has free resources and occasionally free webinars. If you're not already getting the New York State Assembly Grants Action News, I suggest you sign up for that. That comes out monthly. A lot of New York State grants are posted there, but also sometimes regional grants. Grant Professionals Association, we talked about that. There's the link if you want to learn more. Fundraiser Chad has lots of free resources on his website. I'm all about, if it's free, it's for me. And then you can look at this at your leisure when you're actually looking at a 990. But if you've ever looked at a 990, it's a lot of pages, especially if the funder is big like Pepsi. I tried to look at theirs yesterday. It was like 264 pages or something. It was like, oh, let me pick someone smaller. But if you look at an actual 990 and then follow what's on the screen, you can get some quick insights without having to go through mountains of all those pages, because I've told you the parts. So the board staff consultant contacts, I highlighted that. That can be, if it's local, that can be a way for you to use your board or CEO to say, who do you know? The next one made bold is details of the grant making process, which is part 15. I always look at that because they don't always fill it out, but sometimes they will say, applications are accepted on a rotating basis and they can be directed to this person at this address. It's like, oh, that's like a golden invitation, right? And then always I look at the next bolded part, the list of agencies funded with amounts, because then at least you can see, oh, they really do like agencies like me, And I see that most of their grants are 5,000 or 50,000. So you sort of know what to ask for. It's a useful tool. And then I would just remind everybody, funders, you give grants and invest in your organization to make change in the community, just like we exist and come to work every day to make change in the community. So it's all about trying to find the fit and recognizing that what you need internally, like the truck as my example, isn't really what you're going to talk about needing. You're going to talk about that larger impact that you hope to have on the community. And I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank Kayla, but I really, for her help today, but I want to thank all of you because, again, I don't know the positions you have in your agencies, but most agencies are not as staffed as they could be. You know, we're all wearing multiple hats and probably doing more than anyone should be expected to do. And the fact that you took time out of your day on a Friday to learn a little more about grants, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, everyone.